the numbers of time, strangers would come down from the road, stop their cars, and say, would you mind showing us who that was who laughed just now? His laugh had that kind of primordial quality of laughter. It was a laugh almost more of somebody who had been infected by the gods than, it was really quite infectious.
I'm very interested in the fact that he had important and deep relationship with women.
It's one of the most important things, my dear, in Jung. One must never think about Jung without remembering his love of and for women, his love of the feminine in man, as well as for the feminine in women, and the service he performed for women, and the enormous service which women performed for him. Because I think myself that in a scientific way, completely scientific way, Jung did for the world what Dante did in a poetic way. But whereas Dante was inspired by a beautiful feminine face, the face of Beatrice, face of a girl he just saw in the streets of Florence, and which led him from then on right through his life. Jung had the shattering originality to be inspired by what you might call the ugly face of womankind. Jung had an instinct that what was wrong with life, what made life tear apart, made it incomplete, was because the feminine was rejected. And even in his very, very first book, which he called The Psychology of the Unconscious, I think it's now called Roots of the Unconscious, which led to his break with Freud. Because if there's one thing that Freud didn't have conspicuously in his makeup, it was a sense of the importance of the feminine. I mean, Freud was very much an Old Testament phenomenon. He was a prophet. He was a very great man. I'm not saying this to belittle him, but merely to understand him. He was a very great person, a very great pioneer to whom we owe a lot. But he was an Old Testament phenomenon, and I think more of Jung as a New Testament phenomenon. But Jung had this sense of the rejected feminine enormously. When you go back into his life, and particularly if you go into the case histories which he's left behind in the Burgholtzy, which I've done, it's very, very interesting to me how most of the cases that really gripped him were the cases of women who had gone, as they called it then, insane. And there was this famous case of this woman, I think her name was Babette, who in the Burgholtzy hospital, who'd been there for donkey's years, the one who said, Naples and I, between us, must supply the world with spaghetti. And everybody said, my God, she's crazy. Do you see? She's crazy. What is she talking about? To Jung, it was very significant because he saw in this a law of compensation, that she was trying to put herself into an important role because she was feeling neglected. She'd lost her identity. And he learned an enormous amount from this old lady. And when Freud visited Jung in Zurich for the first time, Jung took Freud to see this old lady. And Freud said to Jung afterwards, yes, I can see that she's an interesting case, but isn't she a hideous old lady? I would hate to spend my time with her. And to Jung, this was quite a shock, he told me. It nearly bowled him over because he'd never thought of her in those terms. That's what I mean, that he could follow, not like Dante, the outward beauty and face of womankind, as most men do, he could follow the inner face, the averted, the rejected face of women. And so it was not surprising that when he came across the papers in the case of this extraordinary Miss Miller, who had these fantasies, that he could follow her in her fantasies. And that was his first feminine guide, was a deranged feminine spirit, driven insane, driven mad by a world of men, rejected by a masculine-dominated world. Now, Jung worked in this rejected feminine world of the unconscious for years. People came to him. He was particularly successful with women patients. And one person came into his life very early on, because he's already with Jung and Emma Jung at the famous conference in Vienna, where they are all photographed together, and that is Tony Wolff. Now, Tony Wolff, whatever the diagnosis was, it was a very serious diagnosis. A lot of people who knew her said that they despaired of her ever recovering from whatever her psychological disturbance was. I think one must accept that it was profound enough to fit the rare, exceptional spirit she was, because in a sense, the rarer, the more exceptional the spirit, the deeper the psychological suffering. And Jung managed to bring her out of this, so that by the time of the famous Vienna conference, she was already an integrated, working personality. And to me, that photograph is very moving, because the one who looks young, as if she's just been born, is Tony Wolff. To take it down into the level where it belongs, you see that all the time that Jung was working with the rejected feminine, he was, in a sense, working by projection, to use the term which he coined. And because he was dealing with the feminine through the lives of the rejected feminine in others, an immense charge was building up in himself. And that time when he let himself go, and when he landed deep down in what he came to call the collective unconscious, all this rejected feminine in himself confronted him. And I think this becomes very, very clear in that dream which he tells in Dreams, Memories and Reflections. It's a dream in which Jung again goes down, and he finds somebody whom he thinks is the prophet Elijah sitting there, and there's a great snake, and there's a young girl whom he thinks is Salome, who's blind. And Jung, in Dreams, Memories and Reflections, to my amazement, Jung deals in such detail with all his other dreams. He says, he said, the old man, the sage, and the young girl, it's a frequent theme. You find it in Lao Tse, and you find it in myths and legends, and that's all there is about it. Well, that wasn't what all there is about it. I think this is the moment of Jung's greatest psychological peril. He's confronted with the fact that, like the whole of mankind, he himself, that his anima, his soul, in this aspect is blind. What happens in this period? This is the time when Tony Wolff took over. This is the time. Tony Wolff was not blind. She'd been in this world before. She was the only one who knew it. And she took over from Salome. And she conducted, in this unfamiliar, terrifying underground of the collective unconscious, she was Jung's guide, to such an extent that she lived with him. And she took over the whole of the burden. And of course the tensions caused by that in Zurich and in the family must have been tremendous. But it was done quite openly, lived out quite openly, and I don't think that if it had